Welcome back to the shop, everyone. This week's video takes place in 2026, week 11, March 9th through March 15th, and we are continuing on with bodywork. Now, unlike last week's video, we do move on from doing bodywork to some more what I think is fun stuff. But for right now, I'm just going through and I'm fixing up some small areas. So I'd added some filler to the firewall here. There was a bit of a gap, so just kind of cleaning that up. And then I don't remember what I'm going to do. Oh, I think I'm going to clean up the strut towers. So I've just spread a little bit of filler out on the strut towers, and I just need to kind of clean it up. Now, the strut towers, they're not going to be perfectly like square and smooth. They really just need to be better than what they were. So that's all we're going for, is good enough. In theory, I'm going to have a big engine in there. Big, beautiful engine. It's going to be really nice. That'll be the focal point. If people are, judging the paint, that's their loss. So yeah, just going to go around and just kind of resand all of this stuff off. Now the firewall, there was still a bit of a hole, so just adding a tiny little bit more filler, just to kind of fill in that gap, and then I'll sand that down at some point in time before I paint. Now, what I got to do is I'm taking some sandpaper, and like I did with a lot of the rest of the car, I am just kind of giving all of the primer just kind of a once over with the sandpaper just to smooth it out quite a bit. The primer that I was using, it laid on kind of textury, so it was kind of bumpy. So just using the sandpaper just to smooth everything over. The smoother the primer, I think the better the end result is going to be. Now, mind you, underneath here, I don't care, too much, but just going over it quickly, because, under the car, no one's going to really look at it. So now that I'm kind of done sanding underneath, what I've done is, I think I did this off camera, is I just kind of blew the whole car off with air. I blew out underneath the car. That's why the garage door's open at the front. I've got a couple of fans going. And now what I'm going to do is take my wax and degreaser and just kind of go over the entire car and try and get off as much more contamination as I can. Now, I'm doing this knowing that I'm going to be going over all of this again before I paint, but just trying to do my best to do some cleanup now ahead of time instead of waiting until I'm painting. I think that'll really set me up for success as best as possible. So throughout the week, I'm just going to, blow off the floor as much as possible, trying to get as much of the sanding, dust, and everything off of the floor and out of the shop as I can. All right, with that wiping down done, I'm going to go ahead and remove the plastic from the driver's side, the passenger side, and the hatch. I can leave the windshield, that's not a big deal. But the reason why I'm removing all of this plastic, I wanted to redo the driver's side anyways. There was a lot of primer on it, and that dried primer can flake off. But mainly the reason why I want to do this is because I want to get onto some electrical. So the weather right now isn't really good enough for me to paint. I knew going into the weekend that the weather was going to be kind of crappy, so I wasn't going to be painting. So I might as well get some work done. I do have an event in June. Otherwise, I might have just left it. If I wasn't on a strict timeline, I probably would have just left everything taped up and waited, and a couple of weeks down the line, no big deal. But yeah, so what I'm doing is, as usual, I'm just contemplating some things. So I got some new wiring here. I got blue, orange, and white. That would be for my water pump coils and AC compressor in 14 gauge. But I'm like, do I really need to run new wires? The wires that I already have in the car are sufficient. It will run everything I need it to run. And so I was just kind of like, you know what? I don't need to make that decision right now. I can continue on doing a few things. So I'm just going to kind of run some of the wires to the back of the car. I got a bit of a list on that cardboard as to what I need to do. And yeah, just really, back into my old phase of just like standing around thinking about it. What am I going to do? How am I going to do this? What's the best way to do this? Instead of just, doing it. But that's okay. I've made so much progress on the car so far this winter that I'm okay just dancing around a little bit, thinking about what I'm doing. All right, that was enough procrastinating. It is time to get wiring. So I don't really remember what the first thing I'm going to work on here is. I'm going to pull out old fuel injector wire that I don't need. I currently have, I think, a 16 gauge wire going up for the fuel injectors. That is big enough to handle all 8 of my injectors. I definitely do not need 16 gauge wires going up there, or 14 gauge, whatever I had. One's going to be more than enough. So I'm going to remove one and just run one up, because I do need the relay space. Now, I might do the same thing with my coils. I might move them to 1 and just move it up to a 70 amp fuse, which should be sufficient. I'll still run the 2 wires up. It'll just be one relay, 1 fuse. I need some free relays. I might run a second fuel pump, and I very well might. I need one for the trunk pop to unlock the trunk through a remote. It's a fairly big solenoid, so running a relay for that would probably help quite a bit. So yeah, I'm doing that. Now I'm going to start running wire for my USB chargers. So I want to put some USB chargers in the car, throughout the car. I have one already installed on the passenger side at the top of the cage there. And so each one of these will have 2 USB-A and 2 USB-Cs on them. The reason why I'm doing 3 is, you know, I've got a couple of GoPros in the car usually, phones, battery packs, stuff like that. So I just want to be able to, as I'm driving down the road, you know, charge up everything that I have. You know, if I have a passenger, they'll have chargers. I think it'll just be much, much better. So I've gone ahead. I found out how long I need the wire to be for the farthest charger. I know the other 2 chargers are along the way. So I'm just going to go ahead and I'm going to twist some wires together and get that going. What I'm doing right now is I've just got that wire loosely laid out in the car because I need to find out where I need to break off from that main run for the 2 other USB chargers. So my plan is I'm going to have a USB charger in the back of my center console, and then I'm going to have one at the front of the center console. The back of the center console could run GoPros up on the bar, or, you know, I could be charging battery packs inside the center console. The one at the front could be for my phone. You know, kind of just figure it out as I go type of thing. So yeah, just after I figure out where I'm going to branch it off from, I put some tape on the main harness, and now I need to cut and splice in those breakouts after I finish twisting up the rest of the wires. So this is another moment where I'm like, okay, what am I going to do? So there's my center console, and I'm like, okay, where do I want to put these USB ports? Do I want to like stick it out the side? It's going to be kind of hard to get to. So on the back of this, there's an ashtray for the rear passengers. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to take that ashtray out. I'll 3D print up a custom plate, or maybe I'll just plasma cut out a piece of metal of the same size, kind of use the same rivets, put that over top, and then I will have it so that the USB plugs plug in on the inside of the center console. I think that'll work pretty well. What I also have at the front there is I printed some cup holders, but I don't think I'm gonna actually have the cup holders in the front because my shifter's right there. It actually probably would be kind of awkward, so I'll probably end up moving cup holders somewhere else, probably somewhere near the center console. I could even put one in the center console. Just gotta be careful of the USB. But yeah, so kind of figured out the plan. Now I can, so now I'm putting the wire in the car so that I can kind of mark where I'm breaking them out. And as you can see, this is a fantastic camera angle for you. I'm very proud of my work here. I'm just throwing it in there loosely. I'm taking some tape or some zip ties, and I made some a couple of zip tie marks on the wire where I need them to break out. So I'll take a couple of smaller chunks, twist those together, and then I'll splice them into the main line. one thing that I've been trying to do as I'm running all these wires now is get them in wire loom. Because I know, well, I shouldn't say I know I'm not going to go back, but, you know, pulling everything back out and wire looming it later might not happen. So just protect it as much as I can right now, and then, you know, maybe one day I'll go back and pull the interior out and pull all the carpet out and reloom the rest of it. Or maybe I'll do that before I put the interior back together in the car this time around. It's really going to depend on my timelines. If I feel like if I have a couple of days to spare, then yeah, okay, I'll pull all the wiring back out, loom it all up, and, you know, make it look better. If not, I'll live with it. this wire that I have in my hand, I am running over to the driver's side fender connector that's going to go through into the front of the fender. And the reason for that is I'm potentially going to need a vacuum pump on this car. The camshaft that I have, it may not generate enough vacuum at idle for power brakes. If that is the case, I will have to put a vacuum pump in this car. So I just want to get this wire run ahead of time and in anticipation of that. It would be ideal if I didn't have to, but in the future, knowing me, I might put a bigger camshaft in this thing anyways. We'll see how it goes this summer. If it's, not too lumpy and I don't hate it, I might put a lumpier cam in it. We'll see. But yeah, I'd rather run this wire now. It's one single wire going up to the front. Not a big deal. Better to have it and not need it than need it and not have it. It also just gives me power at the front. There might be a time where there will be a time where I may need another power wire up at the front. So we'll see. This is just good to have in any case. Man, time flies when you're having fun. I thought I'd already done this part. But yeah, so what I'm doing right now is I want it so that, when the door opens and closes through the door pins, that the interior lights come on, because I'm going to have interior lights in the car this summer. So I'm just running the wires for that. So the way that's going to work is I'm going to have a power wire feed go from the headlight switch over to the door pin. Out of the door pin, it'll go to the interior lights to give it power. The lights will just always have a ground, and then we're just switching the power on or off based on those switches. And so, yeah, there's a switch in the passenger side and a switch in the driver's side. So I'm running the wire there, and what do you know? I don't quite have enough 18 gauge red wire. So I'm like, fuck, what do I do? I don't want to wait like 2 weeks to get more of the stuff. Well, I've got this blue 18 gauge kicking around. Don't really remember what I bought it for. So what I'll do is I'll run the red power feed over to the switches, and then the blue will be the return feed to the actual dome light. So that'll, kind of tell me what wire is what when it comes to that circuit. So I'm just going to twist those all together, get them taped up, and then kind of get them in place. So this particular circuit is going to have like not a T, but I guess an X intersection, cross intersection, because I'm going to have wires coming from either door, and then I'm going to have wires going down to the headlight switch, and I'm going to have wires going up to the actual lights themselves. So, quite a bit of wire needed for this. So the astute viewer might notice that this is a blue and black wire. Well, the blue is going to be the power going up to the light, and then the black is going to be the ground going up to the lights. So as I said, this is that little cross. So the blue is going to come down from the A-pillar bar and from the interior lights that are around the top of the cage. The ground is going to kind of go towards the passenger door at that point in time, at that little cross intersection I talked about, and tie into the ground stud, and then the blue wire is going to go down to the headlight switch. Now, the reason why all of this is going to the headlight switch, you might be thinking, that doesn't make sense. Like, the door pins could just turn the light on, and you're right. But most cars, when you turn the headlight dimmer all the way down, if you go a little bit further, it's actually a switch, and it'll turn the interior lights on. Well, my car has the same thing. It's a rotary dimmer switch, so it spins left and right. Turn it right for higher dash illumination, go left for lower. But if you click it left, it actually turns the interior light on. So I'm gonna have that work. I want to make that work. So when you turn it left, the interior lights come on. You can see what you're doing, whatever you want. You drop something on the floor, you can see. You don't have to get your cell phone flashlight out. Or if I'm just on the side of the road, I blow a fuse or something like that, I can just turn the interior lights on, as long as I didn't blow the interior light fuse. So I can turn the interior lights on and then see what I'm doing. So I think it's just a decent idea to have the ability to turn the interior lights on without having the door open. So that's what I'm wiring in. So at this point in time, I think it's just time to start getting some stuff terminated and stuff, in place. So what I'm doing right there is I'm clipping off some splices, because what I need to do is I have that wire in my hand. I want to say that is the CAN bus wiring. So 4 wires, you've got positive, negative, CAN high, CAN low. And so what I need to do is I have the CAN bus wiring coming up to kind of behind the center console to the same place where the radio wires deke off and whatnot. So I've cut it there. I'm going to splice a little chunk to go off to the, I'm going to put a Holley 3.5-inch screen in the car on the dash or on the console. So I'm splicing that off to go there, and then just splicing to go up to my EGT module. So 4 wires, got to cut them, splice them, heat shrink them all. So now I'm going to start working on the termination of the door pin switches and the interior light. So on that connector, there's quite a few wires. So what I need to do is I need to wire the wires going or coming back from the door pins and going up to the interior light into the interior light pin. I currently have one wire in there and it's going to the back of the car right now because I'm going to have some interior lights on the back cages as well. And then what I need to do is I need to wire power. I need to rewire the power wire to split out to those two door pins first. So the door pins will have constant power. When the door opens, it completes the circuit, sends power through to the interior light. So at this point in time, I was thinking to myself, I'm like, how is this going to work? I've got power going out to the pins. Those come back to the interior light. And I just have a single pin going to the interior light. So I've got my multimeter out. I'm checking continuity. And I'm like, okay, well, when I have it clicked over to the left, this pin D1 connects into D2. And, D2 sends the power up to the interior lights. But none of the main power wires going into the switch connect to D2. So I'm like, well, crap, how does this work? So I spent some time just penning this out and trying to reason it out and figure it out. I tried looking up a wiring diagram on my phone. I couldn't really find one. So eventually I just said, okay, well, I know that D1 connects to D2 when the switch is turned. So what I'm going to do is run a jumper wire from my main power feed over to D1. And then when it clicks, it'll send it up to the feed. And then that should be everything I need. Now, I later went and on my computer, I've got a program. I looked in the program at the wiring diagram, and sure enough, that's how it works. The power feed splits, goes to two of the terminals on the headlight switch. I want to say it's the park light and the interior light, and then also splits off to the door pins. So I wired this correctly just by my own figuring it out and intuition, which I'm happy about. I'm glad that I was able to figure that out on my own without needing to see the diagram. And it's great to have that validation. It just feels good when it's like, hey, I figured that out on my own, but it is right. right, with the headlight switch terminated, the next thing I'm going to work on is the clutch position sensor. So this has 3 wires, sensor +5, sensor ground, and then sensor input. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to try and find a wiring diagram for this. I know what year of Cadillac it came off of, but trying to find the wiring diagram wasn't all that great. There were some pictures of the wiring harness online, but not the exact wiring code. So I was like, crap. So I'm like, okay, the wiring diagram that I found had like A, B, C pins. B was the input, which is the middle, and then A and B were the power. But the harnesses that I saw kind of had power and ground reversed, so I may have to redo this wiring on the clutch position sensor. I hope I don't, but I might. Now that I've got that done, I'm going to go ahead and get started on doing some of the terminations for the CAN stuff. So as I mentioned, I've got 4 wires going to behind the dash for a Holley 3.5-inch screen. So I'll run a Deutsch connector on that, and then I will modify the stock Holley connector to accept a Deutsch connector. And then what I'll do is I will run those wires up into the EGT CAN module. So the EGT CAN module uses a super seal connector just like the Holley Dominator does. Fortunately, I have some pins for that. So what I'll do is I will pull all of the stock wires out of the EGT module and replace them one by one with the wires that I've run up there. So that way it's just fully terminated right into the connector. The reason why I'm doing that is I just don't like having a lot of splices, and if I can just wire directly into the device with the correct pin, why not? So what I'm doing right now is I'm figuring out what colors on the connector are what and where the pins go. So I think it's white is power, black is ground, orange is CAN low, orange black is CAN high. And that's kind of a mind fuck for me because I figured that the solid color would have been the high, you know, plus 5 volt, that's kind of high, and then the one with the black stripe would have been the ground, but they do it the other way. So maybe that's just an industry standard. I don't know, messes with my brain though. All right, well, folks, with finishing off the CAN bus devices and the Deutsch connector and getting the screen connected, that is all the time that we have for this video. So as always, if you've stuck around this long, I'd like to thank you for viewing, and we'll see you in the next one.